You're clinging to the face of a towering frozen waterfall, with its icy surface glinting like shards of shattered glass under the pale winter sun. You're inching your way up. The air bites at your face, sharp as the blades strapped to your boots, and your breath crystallizes into tiny clouds that vanish almost as quickly as they form. Every sound feels magnified in the stillness, the crunch of your boots on snow, the metallic clink of your gear, even the faint creak of the ice under its own weight. Your hands are wrapped in thick gloves, but you can still feel the numbing cold seep through. You tighten your grip on the ice axes, their handles rough and reassuring in your grasp. With a deep breath, you raise one arm and strike. The sharp pick bites into the ice with a satisfying crack, sending a spray of tiny shards into the air. The vibrations shoot up your arm, reminding you that every move has to count. One bad strike, and the ice could shatter beneath you. As wild as it sounds, this is just another day for an ice climber out in the frozen wilds, chasing that adrenaline high. In this episode, we're looking together at fatal obsessions, unshakable ambitions, and ultimate sacrifices as I cover the top 4 worst ice climbing disasters in the history of the sport. I haven't stopped thinking about the last story on our list. As always, viewer discretion is advised. It's a crisp, quiet morning on the Stexsalathe route on Sentinel Rock in Yosemite National Park. The sun's rays stretch over the exposed rock faces, bathing them in a warm, golden glow. These towering cliffs are infamous for being one of the most brutal, nail-biting climbs around, where every handhold feels like it could give way just any moment. Add to that the sharp edges of the rock faces, and a fall from even a modest height could easily end in disaster. But for Zach Milligan, none of that is new. He spent years scaling these same rocks and knows every loose crag and edge like the back of his hand. Right now, he's attempting a free solo climb, going up these monstrous cliffs with nothing but his wits to rely on. For those who don't know, free soloing is the most dangerous form of climbing. Climbers attempt this feat without any ropes or harnesses, and the dangers are real. If you're not willing to risk it all, you might want to sit this one out. However, beyond the typical challenges, there's one more thing odd about this particular climb. Zach is doing it completely naked. The reason for this strange act is what he describes as an attempt to connect with God. It might sound insane to you, but that's exactly how Zach's always been. Fearless, wild, and unapologetically different. This isn't even close to the whole picture of Zach's free-spirited lifestyle. What's more important is that it definitely didn't start as extreme as it ended up being. Growing up in Tucker, Georgia, Zach was always a determined and tenacious kid. Right after high school, he jumped into working as an electrical apprentice, logging in over 60 hours a week. He was tough and never backed from putting his head down and getting the work done. When he was 18, he saw a picture of Half Dome while getting a haircut at a barbershop. For some reason, something just clicked. He didn't know why, but deep down, he wanted to climb it. The spark really caught fire on a trip to Atlanta when he walked into a climbing gear shop called Mountain Ventures. There, he saw a photo of the legendary rock climber Peter Croft, free soloing the Rostrum Peak in Yosemite National Park. Zach had no idea what the sport was even called, but at that very moment he decided, whatever that is, that's what I am now. While he was there, Zach picked up a 160-foot-long rope, a solo climbing belay device, some hexes, stoppers, and a bunch of other climbing gear. With no formal training, he dove right in and taught himself everything from square one. In his very first season, he racked up about 100 climbs, tackling some of the most notorious peaks that only seasoned experts dare to attempt. And here's what really shows his uncompromising, ambitious nature. He down-climbed every single one of them. Now, down-climbing, especially in free soloing, takes danger to a whole new level. Unlike climbing up, where you can see every hold, down-climbing means you're often facing away from the rock, trusting your sense of touch more than your eyes. Most climbers would rather find a safer way down, like walking off a different route or rappelling. So, considering Zach was still a teenager in his training phase, this relentless, high-risk approach is nothing short of a remarkable display of guts and grit. By the time he was 19, Zach decided to move from Georgia to Denver. Officially, he was chasing his career as an electrical apprentice. But the real pull was the cliffs of El Dorado Canyon. In the next months, he on-site soloed two infamous routes, the Bastille Crack in El Dorado Canyon and Osiris in Lumpy Ridge. The next year, Zach made his way back to Atlanta and headed over to Mountain Ventures again. He caught up with the shop owner he'd become friends with the last time and asked him about ice climbing. The owner, Doug Peterson, already aware of Zach's rock climbing skills and fearless attitude, gave him a quick rundown of the sport and handed him a set of personal tools and crampons. Later that day, Zach jumped into his 1987 Chevy Celebrity sedan and drove straight to North Carolina to try his hand at ice climbing. The next day, he swung by Mountain Ventures again, picked up his ice climbing gear, and then hit the road for Silverton, Colorado, ready to take on some of the toughest ice out there. In just a couple of days, he had practically jumped into a whole new climbing sport, but with his free soloing experience, it wasn't too tough to pursue. After completing some of the iconic climbs in Colorado, he made his way west to Yosemite Valley. That's when his passion started to grow even more intense. And for Zach, this would be the beginning of a tragic end. Zach arrived in Yosemite alone during the summer heat somewhere in the early 2000s, but over the next 20 years, he ended up living inside the park, spending 13 of those years in caves and boulders, always moving to stay off the radar of park rangers. To make some money, he took a job at a luxury hotel, but his growing restlessness kept him from staying there for long. He was fired after just 2 months for showing up late, throwing a jar of powdered dish soap at his manager, and openly drinking at work. His termination slip read, "Fastest dishwasher I've ever seen, but worst employee ever. Do not rehire." But to his luck, Zach still found another job, this time with the park's cleaning service. He washed dishes, cleaned windows, and installed carpets, but all of this was just to cover his basic food needs. His real passion was the park's cliffs and climbing routes. Over the years, he built an impressive resume of free soloing and ice climbing. Some of his biggest feats included scaling the regular northwest face of Half Dome about 20 times and speed soloing it in just 2 hours and 37 minutes. Zach also took on the 1,600-foot Steg Salathe route on Sentinel Rock an incredible 275 times, and yes, one of those climbs was even done completely naked. When talking about his mindset, he'd put it like this: "You feel like you're in contact with God. It makes me feel like I'm in a magical place." This peculiar, nature-loving, unfiltered attitude stuck with him wherever he went. He'd walk barefoot on the rocks, didn't like having his picture taken, and could easily offend people just by speaking his mind. Zach wasn't the kind of guy to seek out media attention, even though he'd pulled off. But in 2021, something happened that put him right in the spotlight. Alongside his friend Jason Torlano, Zach became one of the first people to ski down Yosemite's Half Dome summit on February 21st. Then came February 2023, when Zach set out for Canada's breathtaking Banff National Park. He spent several days scaling various climbing routes throughout the park, but February 10th marked his most ambitious plan yet, tackling the towering 2,300-foot-high Polar Circus. This legendary ice climb demands top-tier technical skills as it twists up the frozen face of Saskatchewan's Cirrus Mountain. For context, pitches are segments of a climbing route that end at belay points, where climbers secure themselves to avoid catastrophic falls. Multi-pitch routes like this one are necessary when a climb is too tall or complex to complete in a single go. But Polar Circus presents another particularly deadly challenge too. The route runs right under a huge avalanche-prone area that's hard to spot unless you travel further up the road and look back at the route. Estimates say that 94% of climbers attempting this climb have encountered avalanche debris either on or below the route. The most heart-pounding part of the ascent is a 150-foot freestanding icicle called the Pencil, rated at WI6, meaning the ice is super thin and can easily break free at any moment. With all these conditions ahead, Zach began his climb with freezing temperatures biting his skin and snow-covered peaks towering all around. If everything went according to plan, he'd reach the top by sundown. But what he never could have imagined was that fate had something far darker for him to see. What happened to him remains uncertain. Later that day, park officials noticed his vehicle still sitting in the parking lot and grew concerned. They organized a search team, initially hoping he was injured but alive. Time was critical. Rescuers scoured the mountain overnight, but as temperatures plunged, it became clear that even if he had survived earlier, he wouldn't have made it through the brutal cold for long. The next morning, a drone finally spotted his body at the base of the Polar Circus route. The impact suggested he fell from pretty high up, likely from the upper parts of the ice wall, and the fall killed him on impact. What went down with him? Did he get caught in an avalanche? Or did the ice break loose, sending him crashing down? Or maybe he tried something risky again that led to this outcome. We'll probably never know for sure. Zach Milligan lived life chasing adventure in a style that was anything but conventional. But some people approach ice climbing as more of a calculated sport than just a daring feat. The thing is, even with that, the results can still be deadly, and sometimes even more so than you'd expect. Almost 9 months after Zach's death, a tragedy would unfold, making this whole irony an unsettling truth. Born on February 11, 1987, Kyle Allen Rott had just finished high school when his family relocated to Montana in December 2004. While attending the university there, he stumbled upon a passion he hadn't realized was missing from his life. Surrounded by the towering peaks and rugged landscapes of one of the most mountainous regions in the country, Kyle discovered his love for climbing and exploration, developing a connection that would shape the rest of his life. But unlike the daredevils chasing thrills and danger, Kyle embraced his passion with a calm, measured approach. Climbing wasn't about ego or competition for him. It was about community, joy, and the quiet satisfaction of a day well spent among friends. His fluid movements and natural talent on the rock made it look easy, but his focus was always on the journey, not the summit. Ice climbing in particular struck a deep chord with Kyle. The raw challenge of scaling frozen waterfalls and massive walls of ice offered a mix of beauty, precision, and danger that thrilled him. He loved the cold silence, the rhythmic swing of his axes, and the way each ascent demanded complete mental and physical commitment. When he wasn't scaling cliffs or ice formations, Kyle had a creative streak a mile wide. He played the mandolin, painted, did yard work for friends, and pet sat when he could. Every year of his life was a constant mixture of adventure, art, and exploration. His love for the mountains took him all over the western United States and Alaska. Some of his memorable climbs were in the Black Hills of South Dakota, Devil's Tower in Wyoming, Yosemite Valley in California, and his absolute favorite of all, Highlight Canyon in Montana. Everywhere he went, he built strong bonds with like-minded adventurers who quickly became a second family to him. Kyle also served as a climbing guide at Yosemite National Park and worked with Montana alpine guides. He had a gift for storytelling and could spend hours sharing tales of his adventures with anyone who showed the slightest interest. However, amid this all good and green picture, anyone who's been around long enough knows things don't stay that way forever. Life finds the cracks, always where you least expect it. In November 2023, Kyle set off for a brief trip to Highlight Canyon, seeking the thrill of frozen heights and the quiet clarity that only ice climbing could offer. The place had long been his sanctuary where he felt most alive. Except this time things would be different. That year, an early Montana winter had draped the canyon in sheets of ice, and the mountains were blanketed with inches of deep, unstable snow. I can only wonder if Kyle was fully aware of these conditions, or if he simply underestimated them. Whatever the case, what happened next was something no one should ever have to endure. On Saturday, November 25, 2023, around 3 p.m., a GPS monitoring service picked up a distress signal near Grotto Falls in Highlight Canyon. The device officials immediately called the rescue authorities and pinpointed the location. Not long after, another person called 911 after spotting what looked like a fallen climber in the exact same spot. As you probably guessed, both reports were about Kyle, who had fallen hundreds of feet before slamming his head on the sharp, icy rocks. The worst part was he actually survived the initial impact, but then had to endure unimaginable pain while waiting, either for the rescuers to get to him first, or for his life to slip away before they could. And even though the rescue teams, along with several volunteers and 2 helicopters, managed to get to him first, they still couldn't save him. Kyle ended up passing away from severe head trauma in the hospital at just 36 years of age. It's tough to even wrap your head around something like this. Life's tough, no doubt about it. We all go through our share of struggles, big and small, trying to hold it together. But when it's all said and done, when life slips away, you expect it to happen peacefully. But for some people, it's literally the other way around. The next climber I want to talk about could have shed some more light on this heartbreaking reality if she were still alive. But sadly, she lived through the worst and died in pretty much the same way. Robbie Meus was born in 1972. She would go on to describe herself as a girl in a boy's body. From a very early age, she wrestled with 2 major dilemmas that only grew stronger as she did. The first was her obsession with mountains, and the second, and far more personal, was her identity. Robbie never felt she fit the mold of the male role expected by her conservative surroundings. But back then, either of these dreams felt like they were light years away. Coming from a Catholic conservative family, Robbie's life was incredibly sheltered, and even imagining the fallout of revealing her identity to her family was terrifying. Her mom, though, wasn't entirely clueless. Robbie begged her mom to let her wear feminine clothes, but her mother insisted on button-up shirts and short haircuts. As high school came around, Robbie dreamed of escaping Brooklyn and living on her own, but the courage to leave it all behind wasn't easy. Robbie went on to live the life she hated for years. One day, while flipping through the newspaper, she saw an ad for a climbing gym that reignited her love for mountains. After some convincing, she joined, and there, she found the sense of belonging she'd always been searching for. On the cliffs, everyone was equal, regardless of background or appearance. As Robbie immersed herself in this world, she started traveling to places she'd only dreamed of. In the late 90s, a trip to the Adirondacks changed her life. There, she met a forest ranger who left a lasting impression on her. From that day on, she knew she was meant to become a ranger. In 1999, she began training to become a New York State forest ranger. Her life was finally falling into place. In her 30s, she was working her dream job, spending her free time chasing mountains, and everything seemed perfect for the most part. However, her identity remained a struggle she couldn't ignore. At that time, Robbie had been pressured into marriage and even had a daughter. But inside, she wrestled with the expectations placed on her as a man, husband, and father. She tried to convince herself that maybe she wasn't really a woman. Maybe she was just exploring gender or needed an occasional outlet to express herself. So she'd occasionally head to the city, dress as a woman for a day or two, then go back to living as a man. But each time, it got harder to return. The internal conflict became unbearable. That's when Robbie knew she couldn't keep living a double life. In 2016, after 44 years of battling her identity, Robbie came out to her friends and family. The first person she confided in was her wife. Reflecting on that day, she'd say, "I just kind of walked into the house and broke down and told her everything. That was a hard day." From then on, Robbie started dedicating a lot of her time to helping others like her. She hosted several Facebook Live sessions, wrote for magazines, and even performed at storytelling events to share her journey. In 2022, Robbie co-founded the Adirondack Queer Ice Fest with her climbing partner, Melissa Orzechowski. Their goal was to create a safe space for transgender people to explore ice climbing and outdoor adventures without fear of judgment. While her new role as an influencer earned her plenty of love, it was her professional career that really turned heads. Not only did she make several first ascents in the Adirondacks, but Robbie was also an outstanding ranger. In April 2024, A 33-year-old man from New York City went missing in the Adirondacks during a storm that brought up to 19 inches of snow. When Robbie got the call at midnight, she was already out on a mission. But she hiked an extra 6 miles with a 30-pound rescue pack to meet fellow rescuer Chrissy Rodanis. Together, they spotted the hikers' tracks just hours before a blizzard would have erased them. After crawling through deep snow for 3 more hours, they finally found him. Wen was suffering from severe hypothermia and frostbite. Robbie used her snowshoes to carve a trench, dragged him out, and got him to safety just in time. Reflecting on the rescue, Robbie said, "It's always hard to say for sure if I saved someone's life. Maybe he would have made it out on his own, but with this guy, he wouldn't have." For her heroic feat, Robbie was featured in a New York Times article. It was definitely the peak of her career, and for someone who had come this far, it felt like everything had come full circle. Her friends, the people she inspired, and everyone she had helped were all incredibly proud of her. But what no one could have predicted was that this high point would soon be followed by a disaster beyond imagination. Robbie was planning her next big adventure, and it was all set to be an ice-climbing trip to Mount Johnson in Alaska's Denali National Park with her partner, Melissa Orzechowski. On April 25, 2024, Robbie and Melissa began their climb up Mount Johnson's escalator route. With its summit sitting over 8,400 feet, Mount Johnson isn't the tallest peak in Denali National Park, but it's a beast in its own right. Its north face, towering more than 4,000 feet of absolute granite, is famous for its main climbing routes, the escalator and stairway to heaven. Of the two, the escalator is considered the less technical option, but it's still no walk in the park. The route's slippery granite can be treacherous, especially when melting snow makes footing even more unpredictable. Then there's the infamous freeze-thaw cycle. By day, warm temperatures melt the snow and ice, sending water deep into the rock's cracks. When night falls, that water freezes, expands, and fractures the granite, turning stable walls into fatal death traps. Not only that, in case of an avalanche, the narrow couloir of the route can act like giant funnels, channeling falling rocks and ice chunks directly into climbers' paths. On that fateful day, exactly what went wrong during their climb remains a mystery, but one thing is clear. The adventure didn't end as planned. Around 10:45 p.m., somewhere in the upper reaches of the route, Robbie and Melissa were seen tumbling down the mountain. Some estimates suggest they fell over 1,000 feet, slamming into rock and ice along the way. A nearby group of climbers witnessed the fall and immediately called for help before racing down to reach them. When they got there, Robbie was already gone. Her injuries from the brutal impact were instantly fatal. Melissa, on the other hand, was critically injured, but still clinging to life. As the weather worsened and darkness crept in, it became painfully obvious that no rescue helicopter could reach them that night. Thinking fast, the group carved out a snow cave to shield Melissa from the deadly cold and kept her alive with basic first aid until morning. At first light, she was finally airlifted to a hospital. But through it all, Robbie's lifeless body lay beside her partner, cold, unmoving, a silent reminder of how unforgiving this world of ice climbing can be. Stories like Robbie's reveal one of the most unsettling truths about ice climbing. No matter how methodical or prepared you are, no matter if you're not even tackling the most extreme routes, the sport's raw, unforgiving nature leaves you exposed to danger at any moment. Think about it. You're setting foot on a route you know will collapse at some point, but you have no idea when. And still, you keep going, willingly, helpless to stop it. Irony upon irony upon irony. The hardest part is that Robbie wasn't the first to suffer like this, and she won't be the last. Sometimes tragedies like these happen again. That's exactly what unfolded with a 3-person climbing team at Raven Falls, just above Indian Canyon in Utah. This story has haunted and inspired me since I first heard about it, a story of unbelievable heroism and tragedy. But before I get into what went down that day, I want you to take a moment to see what ice climbing at Raven Falls actually looks like. The route up Raven Falls is rated WI4, on the ice climbing scale. Much like Mount Johnson's escalator route, it strikes that perfect balance between danger and thrill-seeking. It's a proving ground. Beginners test their skills here to see if they're ready for more intense climbs, while professionals use it as a warm-up for tougher challenges. The slope here is a near-continuous 80-degree incline, but with steady, confident swings of their ice axes, experienced climbers can make their way up with relative ease. That confidence must have been driving 41-year-old Meg O'Neill when she took to the falls on April 2, 2023. As the most experienced member of her group, she led the charge while her friends followed, belaying her behind. Beads of sweat clung to her brows despite the cold, trickling down her temples before freezing into tiny crystals. Above her, icicles hung like suspended daggers, and with every swing, the weight of the mountain pushed back, resisting her advances. Meg could feel the raw power of nature in the solid, unyielding surface beneath her ice axes. However, she was winning, and she knew it. But then came the sound. The kind of sound that makes your gut twist because you already know something's coming, and it's big. A sharp crack sliced through the air as she darted her eyes upward to take a look. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but silence. And then, her stomach dropped. The ice above her had shifted. A massive sheet fractured away from the wall, creating an avalanche of sharp and deadly ice blocks, hurtling straight down toward her. In that split second, time slowed to a crawl. She could feel every fiber of her body scream into action. The adrenaline hit like lightning, flooding her veins as she searched desperately for a foothold, a grip, a way to move, anything to get out of the path of destruction bearing down on her. But then she saw them, her friends below her on the wall. One was only 21, barely getting started with life and mountains. Meg knew it was either her or them. There wasn't even a choice to be made. She was a teacher and worked as an assistant director with a nonprofit that empowered young refugee women through outdoor education and sports. In that community, she was the heart of the program. She was the one holding everything together. There were students whose futures had changed because of her. So, after spending a whole life putting others first, with a final burst of strength, Meg shoved her friend toward a resting ledge just out of the ice block's deadly path. Her warning shout echoed as her partner tumbled onto safe ground, landing hard but alive. By the time Meg tried to move again a split second later, it was too late. The ice blocks crashed into her with brutal force, burying her under tons of jagged, unforgiving weight. We'll never know if she was killed instantly or left to die beneath the crushing ice with injuries tearing at her last moments. But one thing is certain: she died an incredible hero. The friend she had saved came to her senses moments later with her heart pounding and breath ragged. She scrambled to her feet and saw what had happened. Meg was buried under unforgiving chunks of ice. Their third partner had been thrown 40 feet down the mountain, ending up seriously injured too. Wasting no time, she dashed off to find help. Paramedics arrived swiftly, using a helicopter to lift the injured climber and rush him to the nearest hospital. But it wasn't until the next morning that Meg's body was finally recovered with the help of several volunteers. Her light had gone out. What happened on that mountain that day was something different. It might seem like just another tale of selflessness, but anyone who's been face to face with death knows how monumental it is to put someone else's life before your own. It isn't just an act of bravery. It's a choice made in the purest, rawest moment of instinct and heart. I don't know about you, but imagining myself in that situation, I'm not sure it's even in my top 1,000 instincts to prioritize someone else's survival over my own. So what about you? Would you have the courage to risk everything for someone who wasn't family or a lifelong friend? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay bold and live brave.